artifacts disappeared out of the National Museum, and they found a quote-unquote a few in the garden. A couple of years ago, there was a story about a container that's huge, like a train container, full of artifacts they said were from Kal el-Khalili Market, which is the largest and oldest bazaar on the African continent. And they were not fake. They were real. And there are stories of something going on at the Sphinx where high-level officials and politicians are there, and there's artifacts, and from one frame to the next, the artifact's gone. It shows up on internet in Japan.
Amazing.
And a lot of these artifacts were coming out of the Valley of the Kings. But the things disappearing out of the museum are a much bigger concern. And I keep track of this stuff. And
how they getting out of there? It's got to be organized.
Exactly. Now, I used to be able to take pictures in there, and I've walked around, and I know where things used to be, and I look and look and look for certain items, and they're not there anymore.
Yeah, they're gone.
So the last time I was there's one of the King Tut jewelry rooms was half closed off with a big table with one of these big ledger books, and all the stuff was out of there. Now, they're using the reason that they're building a new museum. You saw a big news story maybe 2 years ago, where they moved the statues of Ramses from Ramses Square, and they put a statue of the president up there instead. Well, his statue is still standing, the Ramses statue, along Alexandria Road in crates. It's just a shame.
It was a $2 million move, wasn't it?
It was a $2 million move. They never dug the foundation for this museum. They're using the excuse that they're moving the stuff, and they're gonna have nicer lighting in the new museum, so they're not going to have as many artifacts. So people aren't supposed to notice that this stuff is disappearing. But there's this gold crown that has like a snake-like pattern going across the corpus callosum, and I look for that all the time. There's lots of beautiful things, and it's missing. They're missing. And there's stories saying that they're gone, and they're going, oh, well, and then they're taking these ledgers to say what's there. How about this? Last March, there was an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in New York of Hatshepsut statues. And there were 30 statues that were broken all at the same time, 20 years after her death. We don't know why somebody got upset about her, but they apparently did. But what they did is they broke them, and they put them all into a pit at Deir el-Bahri near the Temple of Queen Hatshepsut. And when they pulled them out, it was an American team, and they started putting them back together. And then some of them went here, and some of them went there, and some of them ended up in New York because they were given as a gift, and they got distributed. And so last March, at the Met, they brought them all together. They opened a special exhibit room, and I stood there in awe with all these statues together because she was so beautiful. And then they have the nerve to say she was obese and ugly. Thanks a lot. Anyway, so fine, and I got to be alone in the room, the guards just on the outside, and it just felt so special, and I thought, well, that one's from here, and that one's from there. And then I went back to the Cairo Museum a year later, and they didn't put the statues back. Jeez. So all along the top edge of the New Kingdom, 18th Dynasty, Hatshepsut room, there's like 8 statues that aren't there.
Is it profit or something else?
Well, what else could it be?
Well, they could be hiding them for fear of some tragedy.
Oh, well, fine. Well, I never thought of that. But but what my guide was explaining to me is that, they say, well, they're in New York. Oh, well, then they went on to somewhere else, and they went on to somewhere else. They'll be back, and then people forget what's where. But I don't forget that stuff. Like, to me, it's really important. And I mean, if they're protected, then there's other things to protect. I mean, the King Tut stuff is probably more valuable than anything else because most of it's gold. But it's more familiar to people, and that's why I think I'm told, they don't want people with their cell phones or with their cameras inside the museum because they're date and time stamped.
Exactly.
So if something's missing, they'll see it. So I'm not going to claim that I know what's going on, but I am watching these news stories, and I can tell you the items that I'm looking for that aren't there. So I've been over there 24 times now, and one time I went 4 times in a year, and every single time I go to the museum, and often more than once. So it's pretty familiar to me.
Is there a concern by the Egyptian government?
Well, I'm guessing maybe they have something. Well, I shouldn't say that, but no, they're not expressing. They're not expressing a concern. And the newspaper articles are coming out. There's no way I'm going to guess what's going on. All I know is that there are articles about this. It's been going on for years. I mean, at the beginning of Egypt, there was so much stuff in the 1900s. There were 130 seated Sekhmet statues that were made by Amenhotep III, who's Akhenaten's father, and there's only 4 in the National Museum in Egypt. There are 6 in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. So from people doing excavations, and most the countries that were helping with excavations were gifted by the Egyptian government with very lofty and lovely materials. So the obelisk that's in Washington, the other one at the Louvre, they were given. There's a record of that. Even the bust of Nefertiti. It was a deal. They found all this stuff at Amarna. Some of the stuff stayed in Egypt, and some of the stuff went other places. Now, there was something a little shady about how they got it, but they paid for it. And now Zahi wants the bust of Nefertiti to go back. He wants the original Rosetta Stone to go back because there's a replica in the National Museum. Well, these items and the story of those items are traceable. And all I'm saying is that it's quite disturbing because there's so much missing.
Over the years, as you've gone into the museum, have you seen anything that would depict extraterrestrial races or anything like that in the museums?
That's a really good question. And you know what? No, they take it out. But, yes, there are sarcophagi in there. They have sarcophagi. If you go through the wing on the second floor, you'll see a transition between the golden-faced mummies from a later period,
mm-hmm.
and then, the way they were built before and before and before. And then you'll see smaller-shaped ones that may have been for children, and then other shaped ones you're finding the mummies. If you go in the mummy room, you can see that the mummies are smaller, like their skeletons are smaller than we are. Whoop, got music there?
It's time for a break. We'll be back for more. Well, next hour, we'll take your phone calls with Carmen Boulter as we talk about Egypt. Fascinating discussion. On our next Coast to Coast program, by the way, Dr. Lori Ann Levin joins us as we talk about her work with ESP, Life After Death, and also what she believes could be the multidimensional universe. Fascinating. That'll be our next Coast to Coast show. Carmen, you were talking about these small mummies that you would see these sarcophaguses for.
Yes, thanks. So as you move into the other room, then there are boxes, sarcophagi for 12 or 14-foot beings. And, somebody even mentioned recently, well, how do you know it's not a box within a box within a box? Well, that wasn't their style. They put, like in King Tut, they put a shrine within a shrine within a shrine. And so I think they're expecting us not to notice the difference in the size. I was just saying, when you go into the mummy room, you can see that the skeletons and the mummies themselves are smaller than we are, generally speaking. And so that doesn't make sense. And then there's another place, I was thinking at the break, on the outside of King Tut's gold shrine. There's many of them that fit inside each other. There's a sequence where there's a human that's got their legs kind of closed together like Osiris would, which indicates that they're dead, and their head is lifting off, and there's these lines that go between, and then there's these snake images and cat images, and then they're leaning back. I mean, you'd have to see the photograph to know what I mean here, but I am telling you, it is strange. It looks like moving between the dimensional spheres, and there's something odd about it. There's no question. But you're right. Most of everything else that's in there are human-faced, equiline, beautiful, human-looking beings. And fishes and things they would have used. Go ahead.
Right. You said something at the outset, which I think is very important. Why isn't anyone investigating these possibilities? these incredible possibilities that